Today is Wednesday, April 1st, 2015. This is going to be like a collaboration of what I saw on Rachel Maddow last night, Lawrence O'Donnell, and some of the other stuff that I've been reading about in reference to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act signed by Mike Pence. I did have a rant on this yesterday, so it'll be a little bit of a different take on the rant. Rachel Maddow brings up an interesting point, is that the country last 10 years ago, when Terry Schiavo was allowed to pass away after being in a vegetative state for about 10 years, but was very aware of what was going on with that, and they disagreed with the Republicans on that because basically the husband was allowed to do this. Jeb Bush stepped in because Terry Schiavo lived in Florida. He stepped in, he got a law passed, he pulled her out of hospice, put her in a hospital. That was declared unconstitutional. Then he goes up to Congress and gets Congress to do something, gets it to be signed by his brother, George. Now, the one thing I do remember about this is that George Bush flew on Air Force One from his little fake ranch down in Texas back in the middle of the night to sign this thing. That's one thing I really, really do remember. And the point of her saying this is that the country was very strongly against this, and so what she's, and then this is the same thing that's going on with Mike Pence in Indiana, is that the country is wildly against this, especially when you get a whole range of Fortune 100 companies, Fortune 50 companies, basically indicating we don't want to do this because the legislature in Arkansas just passed that yesterday, and the governor Hutchinson, I believe there, said he would sign it. Even Walmart is against it. So there's a whole host of things, but what we're really talking about is the religious right, the GOP, and what public opinion really is. So in the Terry Schiavo case, public opinion was against it 75% to 20% or 30%. Far, far outweighed it. But they still went through every single motion, and the public also felt it was political. Now, the problem that Pence has, the problem with all of this that started with Mike Pence is the fact that Bobby Jindal, Rick Perry, Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, who else is running, so to speak? Ben Carson. All of them had already endorsed the law that discriminates, and now Pence is sort of backtracking, but Pence isn't backtracking because he's backtracking and not backtracking. So he says he wants a clarification of the law, but he doesn't think that there's anything wrong with the law as it is. And he basically said to Sean Hannity when he was on his radio show that it isn't the law that really needs to change, it's the public perception of what the law is that needs to change. So what we're going to have, and also Reince Priebus also indicated very strongly that he was behind the law. So you have a lot of these Republicans that are vying for the nomination, and the RNC is going to be working behind the scenes, on all of this. They're all for this law. And when you have Tim Cook, when was the last time you saw an article in the paper by Tim Cook on politics? When did you last see an article in the paper on Walmart on politics, on LGBT rights, on Religious Freedom Restoration Act? You don't see that. So, as I like to say, because someone was on from the Heritage Foundation yesterday saying that basically all of these people are wrong. So the way I look at it is, so you have the Republican legislature in Indiana getting this law from Alex or all these religious right groups and foundations, signing it with a couple nuns and a couple Amish people, I guess, and in the background are like 3 or 4 white people, and a couple of them are known homophobes who basically indicated that this is what we're going to do with this law. This is how we're going to get back at the gays. And of course, part of this is the response to the fact that they're pretty well assured that they're going to lose the gay marriage thing in the Supreme Court that's coming up. So now we're at the point where what is the legislature going to do, and what will Mike Pence sign? What will Mike Pence sign? Oh, I also want to point out that Hillary came out against the bill. So we have all the Republicans against it, and for the bill, and Hillary against it. So we'll see how that plays, because, and as I mentioned yesterday, gay marriage, climate change, and there's one other thing that I keep forgetting. Those are going to be, how can a Republican be elected who still firmly believe in those things? They'll try and nuance it, but if you get someone like Scott Walker, it'll be hard for him to nuance. Ted Cruz, hard for him to nuance in the general election, considering what they've said. So what's going to happen is, now the Indiana legislature, the House and the Senate, are going to have to come up with a new bill. And there's a lot of competing factions in there, because you have a lot of the religious people indicating, we still want to have this Religious Restoration Act, and we still want it to do the same thing. We just want it to be worded a little bit better to make it appear. And then you have the social, the corporate factions are saying, get rid of this thing, as our good friend from Kentucky, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, we could do it in his form. Get rid of it tooth and nail, root and nail. Take out the whole thing. And so there's going to be a big fight within the House and Senate of Indianapolis as to how they're going to word it and how they're going to make it. Are they going to try and work it just a little bit around the edges? Oh, I feel like Billy right now. Does he try and work it a little bit around the edges? Or are they going to go for what I would call a complete annulment of the whole thing? Now, one thing that I thought was interesting, that Governor, I think his name was Dan Malloy of Connecticut, who came out strongly against it, has pointed out that, hey, Mike Pence is a smart guy. He's a real smart guy. He got elected a number of times in Congress. He came back, got elected governor. He's a real smart guy. Who were the people behind him telling this thing would go well? What was that movie from? Paul Newman was in it, and remember, he was a drunk and he was a lawyer, and they gave him the shot of booze, and he couldn't hold it in his hand. He had to put it on the bar top, and he had to go down and suck it up. That was the verdict. The verdict it was, and it was something against the Catholic Church. And one of the priests, a priest who was one of the lawyers for the church, basically said, as they were drinking out of their demi-tasses, "Hey, guess what? In court, you never want to ask a question that you don't know the answer to." And of course, that same guy asked a question he did know the answer to, and he got screwed. And of course, Paul Newman won. Now, the thing is, Mike Pence is a smart guy. He should have known the answer to this thing before he signed the bill. He should have known there should have been backlash, because there were, I believe I've read a number of things, that there were a number of constitutional lawyers who wrote them and said, this thing is not going to fly. That there was, and Dan Malloy pointed this out, that there was a specific amendment that was brought in by the Democrats that would clearly indicate that there is nothing that this does that would hurt anything in terms of LGBT rights, any type of discrimination, all of that stuff. And that was voted down 40-15, I think that he said. So, Pence knew what he was getting into. He knew that it was on very, very shaky legal ground. He knew that exactly what it would do, yet he didn't anticipate the fallback from it. And now the question is, how are they going to respond? Are they going to wheedle around the edges and hope that it can do the same thing? Or are they just going to tear it out like Mitch McConnell says, root and branch? Let's see what the legislature does. Let's see what Mike Pence does. Let's see how quickly they do it. And because are they going to do it by today's Wednesday? Are they going to do it by the end of this week? Or are they going to sort of linger hoping that maybe it'll blow over after time? We'll see what happens.